When Mick Taylor left the Rolling Stones, the entire music world was stunned. No one could believe that the young man who had given the band its greatest creative breakthrough would be the first to walk away. In the public eye, he was living the dream every musician longed for: global fame, praised by Mick Jagger, respected by Keith Richards, and adored by millions of fans every night. But behind the stage lights, that dream was beginning to crack. In his 20s, Taylor played guitar with a sophistication that made the world look at the Rolling Stones differently, a band once known more for its wildness than its skill. He turned chaos into melody, instinct into art. Yet the very music he brought to life couldn't save him from himself. Within a few years, that glory came at the cost of bitter arguments, long nights lost in drugs, and growing isolation. This isn't just the story of a man who left the greatest rock band in the world. It's the journey of a genius who chose to step out of the spotlight to preserve what was left of his soul, a decision whose echo would follow him for the rest of his life. However, to understand why Mick Taylor walked away from the Rolling Stones, we have to go back to the beginning, to the moment when an ordinary boy from the English suburbs first held an old wooden guitar, unaware that he would one day become a crucial piece of rock and roll history. Mick Taylor was born into a working-class family in Welwyn Garden City, Hertfordshire, in the late 1940s, a time when Britain was still scarred by war. His parents didn't have much, but music was the one thing that managed to find its way into their small home, amid the sound of trains and the haze of industrial smoke. At just 9 years old, Taylor fell in love with the guitar and could hardly put it down. While other kids played football in the streets, he spent hours by the radio, trying to mimic every blues lick by B.B. King or Muddy Waters, men he had never met, yet whose sound seemed to speak directly to his soul. Music came to Taylor not as a dream, but as instinct. By his teenage years, he was already performing with small local bands, playing in dance halls, appearing on television, and even releasing a few independent singles, rare chances for a boy of his background. To adults, he was a peculiar child, quiet and withdrawn, but the moment he picked up a guitar, he transformed. Confident, impassioned, and seemingly fearless. With such talent, everyone believed Taylor would rise beyond his humble beginnings. And indeed, no one could have predicted that only a few years later, that same boy would stand on stage beside the very legends he once knew only from worn-out records, beginning a journey that would be both dazzling and tragic. Fate came to Mick Taylor in the most unexpected way. One evening, still a teenager, he bought a ticket to see John Mayall's Blues Breakers, the celebrated blues band of the time, fronted by young guitar hero Eric Clapton. But that night, Clapton didn't show up. The audience buzzed with disappointment. Yet Taylor felt something stir within him. With a guitar in hand and a courage rare for a 17-year-old, he approached the band and told them he knew all their songs and could fill in. Instead of laughing, John Mayall invited him to try. Within minutes, the room fell silent. The skinny boy played blues as if he had been born to it, not imitating Clapton, but bringing his own voice, smooth, fluid, and deeply soulful. When the song ended, the applause went on and on. Mayall stood frozen, realizing he had just witnessed something extraordinary. But Taylor, shy by nature, didn't stay to bask in praise. He quietly left the stage, melting back into the crowd as if he'd never been there. It wasn't until a year later, when Mayall placed an ad in Melody Maker seeking a new guitarist, that Taylor reappeared, this time with the quiet confidence of someone who had once seized destiny by the strings. Mayall recognized him instantly and didn't need another audition. With that single memory and one unforgettable performance, Mick Taylor's professional journey began, the first step toward a life that would never be the same. When Mick Taylor officially joined the Bluesbreakers at 17, he was immediately thrown into a trial by fire. He had to fill the void left by Eric Clapton, a towering shadow in the world of blues guitar. Every eye was on the young man, not out of faith, but out of curiosity. How long could he possibly survive in that position? But Taylor didn't just survive. He made everyone stop and look again. In his very first month, the band entered the studio and finished the album Crusade in just 7 hours, a feat few bands could ever match. Under Taylor's fingers, the guitar took on a new breath, clean, refined, not as fiery as Clapton's, but far more soulful, closer to the essence of pure blues. Crusade wasn't just a successful recording, it was a declaration, the dawn of a new generation of bluesbreakers, with a teenager not yet 20 at its center. That success opened a life Taylor had never known before. Endless nights of performing, tours across Europe, and the seductive world of rock and roll excess. He befriended musicians who were reshaping the sound of their era, including Jimi Hendrix, living amidst sound, smoke, and a rhythm that never stopped. Yet even in the frenzy, Taylor held on to what made him different, an almost obsessive focus on his instrument. It was that devotion that made him the longest-serving member the Bluesbreakers ever had. A rare feat for a band notorious for its revolving lineup. But every light casts a shadow. As Taylor's talent grew brighter, the distance between him and John Mayall, his mentor and guide, began to widen. Mile, long accustomed to being the leader, grew uneasy with his protege's brilliance. In their final recording sessions, the air grew thick with silence and tension. Taylor realized that his mentor now saw him as a rival. After Blues from Laurel Canyon, 1968, Taylor knew it was time to leave. That album felt like a quiet farewell, closing one chapter of Apprenticeship and opening another for a musician ready to carve his own path. He left without anger, only the conviction that he had outgrown his teacher, and that greater, brighter roads awaited him ahead. What he didn't know was that those very roads would lead him to the height of glory, and to the turn that would change his life forever. In 1969, just as Mick Taylor left the Bluesbreakers, the Rolling Stones were in the midst of their greatest crisis since the band's creation. Brian Jones, co-founder and the group's original soul, had spiraled into addiction, faced criminal charges, and become incapable of performing. Recording sessions were chaotic and disjointed. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards had to confront an unavoidable truth. They needed a new guitarist if the Stones were to survive. Once again, fate placed Taylor in the right place at the right time. A former Bluesbreakers bandmate introduced him to Mick Jagger. At 20, Taylor had everything the Stones needed: youth, talent, good looks, and little fame, meaning he could blend in and, more importantly, be managed. That was exactly what Jagger and Richards wanted. Not another superstar like Clapton or Jeff Beck, men with massive egos and their own creative agendas, but someone skilled enough to fill Brian Jones' void without upsetting the band's delicate balance of power. Mick Taylor was the perfect fit. Yet at his first rehearsal with the Stones, Taylor was stunned, not by admiration, but by disappointment. He couldn't understand how a world-famous band could play so loosely, so off-tempo. To ears trained on pure blues, the guitars and drums sounded completely mismatched. But instead of walking away, Taylor saw an opportunity to transform it. Soon after joining, he began reworking and overdubbing much of the guitar on Let It Bleed. His fluid, blues-infused playing style brought warmth and coherence to the band's rough edges. From then on, the Stones' sound evolved dramatically. No longer just raw, instinctive rock, but music with new depth, rhythm, and nuance. Within weeks, Mick Taylor had done what many thought impossible. He breathed new life into a band on the verge of collapse, reviving the Rolling Stones just as they were about to fall apart. Just a few weeks after officially joining, Mick Taylor stepped into the defining moment of his life, the Hyde Park concert on July 5, 1969. It was supposed to be a triumphant debut, marking the start of a new chapter in the Rolling Stones' history. But just days earlier, tragedy struck. Brian Jones, the band's founder and original soul, was found drowned in his swimming pool at the age of 27. A somber mood blanketed London. Hundreds of thousands gathered at Hyde Park, not just to see the Stones perform, but to say goodbye to Brian. The band dressed in white, releasing thousands of white butterflies into the air in his memory. And Taylor, the newcomer replacing Jones, found himself at the center of that storm of grief and doubt. He hadn't even had time to become a Rolling Stone before being thrust into the heart of loss and scrutiny. Before more than 250,000 people, Taylor gripped his guitar, his heart heavy. He knew every note he played would be compared to the man who was gone, and every eye watched to see whether the young guitarist could save a band teetering on the edge of collapse. But when the opening chords of Jumpin' Jack Flash, I'm Free, and Honky Tonk Women rang out, Taylor not only held his ground, he silenced Hyde Park with awe. His playing wasn't fierce or showy, but mournful, resonant, and filled with quiet sorrow, like a final farewell in music. The concert transformed from a debut into a memorial, and from that moment on, Mick Taylor's name became tied to a different kind of destiny. He entered the Rolling Stones amid tears, and would one day leave them in solitude. Hyde Park, with its white haze and sorrowful guitars, felt like a premonition of what was to come. A road where his brilliance and his tragedy would walk side by side. Only months after that fateful day at Hyde Park, Taylor witnessed another moment that would be etched into rock history, darker and more terrifying than anything he could imagine. By the end of 1969, the Rolling Stones headlined the Altamont Speedway Free Festival in California, promoted as the Woodstock of the West. More than 300,000 people gathered, a sea of bodies and dust vibrating to the sound of guitars. But amid that euphoria of freedom, no one realized they were stepping into a nightmare. In a disastrous decision, the organizers hired the Hells Angels motorcycle gang as security, paying them with nothing more than a few cases of beer. By the time the Stones took the stage, the atmosphere was taut with tension. The crowd surged forward, and the Hells Angels began swinging pool cues at anyone who got too close. During Under My Thumb, a young black man named Meredith Hunter tried to climb onto the stage. He was shoved back, pulled out a gun in panic, and was immediately stabbed to death by a Hells Angel before the eyes of thousands. Mick Taylor and the rest of the band froze in horror. Jagger's face went pale with shock, while Taylor could only see blood and chaos erupting below. Everything was caught on film. The image of Meredith Hunter collapsing became the grim symbol of an era's demise. People called it the death of the 1960s, the moment love and music could no longer hold back violence. Though shaken, the Stones kept playing. Not out of coldness, but out of fear that stopping might spark a riot. From that night on, the band would never be the same. For Taylor, Altamont was more than a trauma. It was the first sign that behind the Rolling Stones' magnificent sound lay a darkness waiting to consume everything in its path. After Altamont, Mick Taylor thought he had seen the worst, but in truth, that was only the beginning. When he joined the Rolling Stones, he carried with him the discipline of a musician shaped in the rigorous world of the blues breakers, where every show, every take was serious work. He didn't yet know that the Stones were an entirely different universe, not just a band, but a way of life, chaotic, indulgent, and drug-soaked. Here, fame wasn't earned solely through music, but also through scandal, sleepless nights, and endless highs in luxury hotels. Within a year, Taylor began to see what fans never did. Beneath the glittering surface of the greatest rock band in the world was a decaying machine, fraught with financial troubles and chaos. In 1971, he discovered he owed over $22,000 in taxes, an enormous sum compared to his real income. In truth, he wasn't alone. The entire band was in the same predicament, victims of mismanaged contracts and reckless spending. To escape the clutches of British tax authorities, the Stones were forced into exile, becoming tax exiles in the south of France. Amid the turmoil, there was one small light in Taylor's life: the birth of his daughter Chloe with his girlfriend Rose Miller. But that joy was only a flickering candle in a storm. As the band began recording Sticky Fingers and later Exile on Main Saint, Taylor carried much of the guitar work himself, as Keith Richards had plunged deep into addiction. Recording sessions followed no schedule, often beginning at midnight and running until dawn. The music echoed through the basement of Villa Nelcote, a lavish mansion on the Riviera, where smoke, heroin, and sound mingled into a surreal haze. Taylor described that period as a chaotic summer camp. People coming and going, no one knowing when a song began or ended. Yet amid that madness, masterpieces were born: Brown Sugar, Wild Horses, Tumbling Dice, songs that would define the Stones' legacy. Taylor played as if trying to hold the band together, serving as both musical anchor and bridge between Jagger's ambition and Richards's disarray. In 1972, the Stones launched the Exile Tour, a sprawling, electrifying series of concerts now remembered as the band's zenith. The crowds roared, the stages exploded with energy, and Taylor, with his Les Paul in hand, became the musical heart of those nights. But behind the blinding lights lay exhaustion and emptiness. When the tour ended, he was spent, isolated, and slowly realizing that to survive in the Rolling Stones, one needed more than talent. One had to be willing to lose oneself completely. After the frenzy of the Exile Tour, the Rolling Stones entered 1973 with an indescribable hollowness. Goat's Head Soup was recorded amid fatigue, tension, and creative burnout. Songs like Angie and Coming Down Again were tender and romantic, but lacked the bite that once defined the Stones. Critics noticed. They called it the weary echo of men who once seemed immortal. For Mick Taylor, it was the first sign that the music he once believed in was slipping off course. Amid that gloom, Taylor began to lose direction. The relentless pressure, endless touring, and constant exposure to drugs drew him into the same spiral that had consumed Richards. Once the member who grounded the band with structure and emotion, Taylor now found himself losing control. By 1974, as the band began recording It's Only Rock and Roll, tensions between Taylor and Richards had reached their breaking point. Richards erased or reworked many of Taylor's guitar parts himself. Worse still, Taylor discovered that his own compositions, particularly Time Waits for No One and Till the Next Goodbye, had been stripped from the songwriting credits. He had written, played, and shaped the soul of those songs. Yet his name was nowhere to be found. It wasn't just professional betrayal. It was a deep wound to his pride as an artist. The atmosphere within the band had become toxic. Bassist Bill Wyman later recalled how Taylor grew withdrawn, quiet, and detached from everyone. He was no longer the bright, driven young man he once was, but a lonely figure adrift in fame. When it became too much, Taylor escaped to Brazil for 6 weeks, hoping to find some peace. But when he returned to London, What awaited him was not reconciliation, but another blow. His name had been completely removed from the album. Its only rock and roll was released without a single acknowledgement of his contributions. That was the breaking point. Every effort, every ounce of passion had been buried beneath the silence and power of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Taylor knew then that he no longer belonged in that world. Inside him, something broke. The melodies he once poured his soul into now echoed with bitterness, the prelude to a decision that would soon shock the entire band. When his faith in music finally began to crack, Mick Taylor turned to the people closest to him for answers. Rose Miller, his longtime girlfriend and witness to every storm of the past few years, was the first to say what Taylor himself had been too afraid to admit. She told him he should leave, that no fame was worth sacrificing his health, his dignity, and his soul. But Taylor hesitated. Leaving the Rolling Stones, to him, felt like leaping off a speeding ship in the middle of the ocean, a choice that could change the entire course of his life. Producer Andy Johns, who had worked side by side with Taylor through countless sessions, sensed the tension as well. One night, through cigarette smoke and the smell of whiskey, he looked at Taylor and said bluntly, "If you can't take it anymore, do something about it." It was meant as compassion, but it became the spark that ignited an irreversible decision. In December 1974, at a party at Eric Clapton's house, where nearly every rock legend of the era was present, Taylor quietly approached his bandmates. No shouting, no drama, just a single sentence that froze the room. "I'm leaving the band." No one reacted at first. Mick Jagger thought it was a joke. Keith Richards just stared, stunned. But Taylor didn't repeat himself. He nodded once, turned, and walked away. Just as silently as he had once stepped off stage after his first impromptu performance with John Mayall. The decision shocked the entire music world. The Rolling Stones were preparing to enter the studio for a new album. Everything was in motion, and no one had ever quit before. In the band's history, people were fired or fell apart from addiction, but no one had ever walked away. Yet Taylor did, quietly, decisively. A few days later, he received a telegram from Keith Richards, the very man many thought despised him. The message was brief. "Thanks for 5 great years. All the best." Taylor read it and broke down in tears. It was one of the rare moments of genuine warmth he ever received from anyone in the Stones. As for Andy Johns, he would later admit, "That was the worst advice I ever gave anyone." To everyone else, Taylor seemed insane. Whispers spread through the industry. "No one leaves the Rolling Stones? The guy's lost his mind." But deep down, Taylor knew he wasn't crazy. He had simply chosen freedom, while the others remained prisoners of their own fame. At just 25, while most of his peers were still chasing the spotlight, Mick Taylor had to start over. No Rolling Stones, no roaring stadiums, just an empty road ahead. But even at his lowest, music was the one thing left to hold on to. He soon began collaborating with Jack Bruce, the former Heart of Cream, experimenting with complex blends of blues and rock. Later, he worked with Bob Dylan, touring with his band, and contributed to projects with George Harrison, Mike Oldfield, and many others. Though no longer the star at center stage, Taylor's guitar was everywhere, quiet, unmistakable, and irreplaceable. Yet the 1970s remained the darkest chapter of his life. Isolation after leaving the Stones drove him deeper into addiction. His marriage to Rose Miller, once his anchor through the chaos, fell apart quickly. He lost nearly everything: fame, money, and even himself. For years, he played in small clubs, touring obscure European circuits, clinging to music as his only way not to collapse. It wasn't until the 1990s that Taylor truly emerged from the shadows. He stopped, sobered up, and slowly found peace. Life settled into a gentler rhythm. No more pressure, no more comparisons. In 1998, he welcomed his second daughter, Emma, a late gift from life that seemed to close the wound of his past. By then, he understood. He had already lived through every loss he was meant to endure. Today, Mick Taylor lives quietly in the Netherlands with his longtime partner. He still plays guitar, still performs from time to time, not for fame, but for the pure joy of making music. Occasionally, he reappears on stage with the Rolling Stones during reunion tours like 50 and Counting or No Filter, standing once again beside the men who were once his past. There is no bitterness now, no resentment, only music, the one thing that bound them from the beginning and the only thing that ever truly remained. Years later, when everything had faded into memory, Mick Taylor finally decided to speak. In a 2009 interview, he sat quietly, his voice low but firm, recounting the years that had haunted him for decades. He said that behind the glory and the massive record sales, the band was rotting from within. The Rolling Stones kept making money, he said, but the spirit of the band had been dead for a long time. The conflicts, addictions, and oversized egos had made it impossible for anything pure to survive. Taylor admitted that from the beginning, he never expected to stay with the Stones forever. It was an adventure, not a lifelong vow. "I always felt like I was just passing through," he said, a simple confession that carried the weight of a lifetime of reflection. Yet looking back, he couldn't hide a quiet regret. When he announced his departure in 1974, Mick Jagger had offered him 6 months off instead of leaving for good. But Taylor, too exhausted and too proud, refused. 30 years later, he sighed softly. "Maybe I should have taken it." The story grew colder when he recalled the day he officially quit. Taylor phoned the band's office to confirm his departure. There were no thanks, no goodbyes. The first thing the Stones staff asked for was the return of his gold American Express card, the emblem of privilege and prestige he once held. A dry, clinical end, as if years of music and brotherhood had been reduced to a balance sheet. That moment, Taylor said, was when he understood the true value of fame. It never really belongs to you. And when the lights go out, all that remains is silence. Mick Taylor's legacy isn't measured by record sales or sold-out tours, but by the notes he left behind. Notes that forever changed the DNA of the Rolling Stones and of 1970s rock. Though he was with the band for only 5 years, Taylor brought a depth they'd never had before. More refined, more emotional, more musical. Tracks like Sway, Can't You Hear Me Knocking, Time Waits for No One, and Moonlight Mile don't just mark the band's golden era, they stand as proof of Taylor's influence in shaping the Stones' distinctive blues rock meets jazz sound, the style that pushed them beyond their own boundaries. Critics often say that if Keith Richards was the wild heart of the Rolling Stones, Mick Taylor was its soul. His technique and sensitivity guided the band out of the darkness following Brian Jones's death, ushering in a new era. One where they were not just rock and roll bad boys, but true artists. Producers and historians still call 1969-1974 the golden era of the Stones, the exact years Taylor was in the lineup. That is no coincidence. Even after leaving, Taylor's influence quietly rippled through generations. Guitarists from Slash, Guns N' Roses, and Joe Perry, Aerosmith, to John Frusciante, Red Hot Chili Peppers, have all said they learned from Taylor how to make a guitar speak. He never chased speed or flash. Instead, every note he played felt like a whisper, a quiet answer to loneliness within music itself. But perhaps Taylor's greatest legacy lies not in his technique, but in his choice. The courage to walk away from greatness when everyone else believed they had to cling to it. In a world where fame can become a cage, Taylor chose freedom, a choice that cost him his career, but immortalized him as a symbol of honesty in art. Today, Mick Taylor's name may not be as frequently spoken as Jagger's or Richards's, but whenever the first notes of "Can't You Hear Me Knocking" echo, listeners can still feel that unmistakable emotion only he could create. A sound both beautiful and sorrowful, like the memory of a man who once stood at the summit and chose to step down in silence. And perhaps that is why, in the noisy world of rock and roll, his silence has become the loudest echo of all. When all is said and done, Mick Taylor remains proof that sometimes the worth of an artist lies not in how far they go, but in knowing when to stop. He walked away from an empire while others clung to it, choosing stillness in a world obsessed with spotlight. And in that stillness, his name never faded. He needs no monuments, no massive stage to prove his existence. Taylor endures in every song he ever touched, where the guitar doesn't just sound, but breathes, aches, and lives like a human heart. A true artist doesn't need an audience to validate his truth. He needs only one honest moment with himself. If music can tell the journey of a soul, then Mick Taylor's life is one of the saddest and most beautiful solos rock has ever known. Let's hold on to that sound so that every time "Can't You Hear Me Knocking" plays, we remember the man who chose freedom over glory, and in doing so, became eternal. What do you think of Mick Taylor's journey? The quiet, gifted legend who helped create the Rolling Stones' golden era? Which of his songs or solos left the deepest mark on you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to keep discovering the untold stories of rock's most inspiring icons.